guys, I'm here with your last video for Chapter 3, Intro to Criminal Law. So in the first one, we went over some terminology and concepts. In the second one, we talked about elements of crime. So for this video, we're going to talk about criminal defenses. So we're just going to get a quick overview of how the defenses are sort of classified and broken into categories and how they are used to defend somebody in a crime. So I will share my screen and we will talk about criminal defenses for a minute. Okay, it's a pretty short lecture. So we talked about the fact that in order to convict somebody of crime, you have to prove all of the elements of the crime. So the corpus delicti was the body of the crime, and that body of crime is made up of different elements. So we have actus reus, mens rea, concurrence, causation, harm, and attendant circumstances. So a prosecutor has to charge all of those things together and prove all those things in court beyond a reasonable doubt in order to convict somebody. Now, on the flip side, a defendant could raise a criminal defense, and then that would still keep them from being criminally liable. So let's start at the very beginning. What is a defense to a crime? So obviously you have defenses like your mom says, "Did you do the dishes?" "No, because and you have a reason why you didn't do it. Same thing with a crime defense. A defense is a reason why you should not be liable for the criminal charge. So if you are raising criminal defenses, you are making arguments of why you should not be responsible, why you should not be punished for these crimes. Now, sometimes the arguments are, I didn't do it at all. And sometimes the arguments are, okay, I did the elements of the crime, but I still shouldn't be responsible for those elements for these particular reasons. And we're going to look at what those particular reasons are. So when you take all the defenses, you can break them down into four main categories because there's lots and lots and lots of defenses. So you can break them down into categories. So the first one, alibi, is just a defense by itself. It's not a category, it's just a defense. So if you have an alibi, you could not have done it because you were somewhere else, okay? But then we have these categories. We have justification defenses, we have excuse defenses, and we have procedural defenses. So those are not defenses by themselves, those are categories. It would be like saying I ate food, but you didn't really say what food you ate. So if you say I have a justification defense, that would be like saying food. It wouldn't be giving a specific type of defense. So these are just categories. And then we will look at the different specific defenses that fit into each category. So justification defenses are, I did it, but I was justified in doing it. So you actually admit that you do it, but you were justified. Excuse defenses are, I did it, but I have a valid excuse or reason why I did it that excuses my behavior. And then procedural defenses could be that I did it, but you didn't follow the proper constitutional procedures, and therefore you can't hold me responsible. Okay, so remember alibi. Alibi is actually one that you say, I did not do it. I did not commit this crime. So an alibi says you didn't do it because you were somewhere else. So if you want to raise an alibi defense, you have to prove to the prosecutor that you were somewhere else. So think about how you would do that. If you had to prove where you were yesterday at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, what evidence would you use at trial to prove where you were at? So maybe it's a receipt from a store, maybe it's a videotape, maybe it's a witness. So you, as that defense, would have to prove why you were not where they say you were. Okay, so that's one where you don't admit that you actually did it. Then we have our classification of category of justification defenses. So justification defenses, remember, you were justified in doing it. So I did it, but I was justified in it. And therefore I was justified by the law, and therefore I'm not criminally responsible. So when you're talking about justification defenses, you can break those into four different specific defenses. So remember, justification is the category, and these are the four defenses. So self-defense, you had to use a reasonable amount of force to stop force being used against you. Okay, so it depends on what level of force the person's using against you, who started it. If you're the one that started it, you can't use self-defense. That's called the initial aggressor. But if you're not the initial aggressor and somebody uses force against you, you can use the reasonable amount of force back to stop them. So if they punch you in the face, then you can probably punch them back. But if they do something to you that is likely to cause your death, they pull a knife, they pull a gun, they're cracking your head against the cement. If what they're doing to you is likely to cause your death, then you can do something back that could likely cause their death. So it's always equal force. Okay. Now, defense of third party, you're defending someone else. As long as you have a legal right to defend them, then you can use self-defense to defend them. You can only defend people that had self-defense themselves. So if the person was the one that started it and you're defending them, that's not going to be a valid defense of a third party. And then you have necessity. Necessity is the idea that it was necessary to do it. So if you compared two bad things, there was a bad winter storm and you had to break in a little cottage to survive. Both two bad things, breaking into a cottage, but dying in the snow. Since dying in the snow is worse, we're going to allow you to do that and not be charged with a crime. Now, you can never kill somebody or hurt somebody under necessity. Necessity is usually for some sort of a property crime. So you had to speed to get to the hospital to see somebody that was really sick in the hospital. That would be a necessity. And the last one is consent. So consent is the idea that the victim agreed to be a victim, okay? So you can say the victim consented. So a lot of times you see the consent defense with sex. So sex offenses, where the defendant's justification defense is the victim agreed to the sexual act. And therefore there's consent, so you cannot charge me with a crime because there was valid consent, okay? So that's the justification category. We also have excuses. So this is, I did it, but I had a valid legal excuse for it, so I should not be punished. So when you're looking at excuse defenses, there's 5 different excuse defenses. The first one is duress. Duress is very similar to necessity. Necessity is somebody else was forcing you to do something. So remember, necessity, it was some force, like somebody sick in the hospital or a snowstorm. It's another force getting you to do something. Duress is somebody else is putting pressure on you. So if you don't rob this bank, I will kill your mother. Okay. So another person is putting you under duress for you to commit the crime. The next one is infancy or age. We require people to be a certain age before we think they can form the mens rea necessary for the crime. So remember, mens rea is the mental capacity. We don't believe that anybody under the age of 7 has the mental capacity to commit a crime. And then between 7 and 15, okay, you have some capacity, but your brain is still not developed. So we're going to call you a delinquent and put you in juvenile court instead of criminal court, adult court. So infancy or age can be an excuse. Mistake. So we have to understand a mistake can be you made a mistake about the facts that were happening, or you're making a mistake you didn't know it was against the law. And we have to draw a distinction between those two things. If you're merely making a mistake on the law, that is never a valid excuse. So write down, mistake of law, never a valid excuse. So when a police officer pulls you over and said, did you know you were speeding? And you said, no, I didn't know the speed limit. That is never a valid excuse. You have to know the laws. You're required to know the laws. They're all written down and they're all available to you. But mistake of fact may be different. If you thought the facts were one particular way, so that's why you acted, and it ended up the facts were different, but you reasonably believe they were the other, then you can use that. So I always use the example of my mother. She drives a golf cart in her place where she lives. So she would drive her golf cart to her activities. And one day she drove golf cart home and my dad was like, that's not our golf cart, because they all look the same and they, use a universal key. So that would have been theft, but she could have said mistake of fact. I thought this was my golf cart. Involuntary intoxication. So if you are involuntarily intoxicated, somebody spikes your drink or something like that, that can be a valid excuse. But if you voluntarily drink or do drugs, it is not a valid excuse. And then insanity. Remember, we have mens rea. You have to be able to form the mental intent. Insanity is the idea that your brain is not functioning properly, so you could not rationally form mens rea for the crime. So that could be a valid excuse for the crime. So that's the category of excuse defenses. And then the last category we have is procedural defenses. So procedural defenses are somebody that worked in the system, made a mistake, and you cannot be held criminally responsible now. So the first one is entrapment. Entrapment is if somebody, the police, gets you to do something you would not have done. So if I walk up to you and say, I'll give you $50 for the Coke, and you hand me Coke, that's not entrapment. And I'm a police, I can arrest you. That's not entrapment. You willingly were going to sell it. But if I walk up to you and say, give me Coke, and you say no, and I say, give me Coke, and you say no, and I just keep nagging you and get you to do something you would not have normally done, then that could be entrapment. Okay. Double jeopardy is being charged twice for the same offense. That's a defense to a crime. You cannot do that. Denying a speedy trial. We have specific procedural time periods where trials have to be held. So if it takes longer, then that's not going to work. And then procedural or prosecutorial misconduct is if the prosecutor hides evidence, doesn't disclose stuff to the defense, does something that violates a defendant's constitutional rights. That's a valid defense. And then police fraud. If they like do something to the evidence, or they hide their own evidence, or they do something to fraudulently make it look like you committed a crime, that could be a procedural mistake and then be a valid defense to your crime. Okay, so I have a learning check. So read through each one of these and decide which is the justification, which is the excuse, and which is the procedural defense. And then stop the video. And when you're ready, turn it back on and you'll see if you're right. Did you get it right? Hopefully. If you have any questions, please reach out and ask me. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions on any of the defenses. Here's one more review. So if you want to stop the video, see if you can fill in the blanks, see if you understood everything I said. And then when you're ready, you can start the video. Did you get it right? Hopefully you got them all right. So again, if you have any questions, please reach out. Always ask. Don't ever be afraid to ask. Just because I may not be in class with you doesn't mean I don't want to answer any questions that you may have. Okay. So the last thing is, if you want to practice with some of these defenses and make sure you really understand them, there's a practice assessment that you can take over and over. That's called Name That Defense Assessment, to really make sure that you understand all the defenses. And the last thing is the Chapter 3 assignment. So there is no discussion for Chapter 3, I don't think. So because this is a bigger assignment, actually there may be a discussion. Can't remember now. I don't think so. I don't think there's a discussion for discussion for Chapter 3, because this is a bigger one of the assignments. So make sure you go to Chapter 3 assignment, you read it very carefully, and you start to write a story. Make sure that you fit all the things that I require in your story. Okay, and then post it to the assignment tab and I will grade them. So I hope you enjoyed this week. If you have any questions on any 3 of the lectures, reach out. I'll be happy to answer. And otherwise, I will see you next week. Have a really nice weekend, and I will see you soon.